Roman Catholic. And to the south was reigning Elizabeth, Queen of England, who was an Anglican. So when James was baptized at 6 months, he was baptized as a Roman Catholic. Later, eventually Mary was executed, so James had to take over some of the government. At age 11, he was already active as a governor, with help, I'm sure, of Scotland. He made his grand entrance into Edinburgh at the age of 13. And they did the typical tourist view of Edinburgh Castle first, and then up to St. Giles Church, and then down to Holyrood Palace. And when they left St. Giles, there was a statue of Bacchus. Now Bacchus, you know, Bacchus, wine, and he was practicing what he stood for. And many other people who were there at that celebration. Here's the young king entering the city, really for the first time since his birth. So everybody was celebrating, and that meant a lot of wine flowed that day in the capital. Also, at the end of the little tour, there was an astrologer. And the astrologer, on the basis of James's birth date, predicted great, wonderful wealth and success for the young king. I suppose that helped him with job security, too. At any rate, time moves on, and James is growing up, and he wants to be the King of Scotland and England. Well, that wasn't easily accomplished, because Elizabeth was doing all she could do to stir up problems and factions and warlords in Scotland. So some things had to happen before James would have a ghost of a chance even to be the king of a united England and Scotland. And I, in thinking about this, I thought about 4 or 5 things that had to happen if he had a chance. First of all, he would have to be married, because he'd have to have an heir. And Elizabeth wasn't very good at that particular thing, as you know. So he had to have a wife. And he found one, actually second choice in the family, of the bride, that is. He found one in Denmark, Anne, or Anna of Denmark. And this was different from today. He was married in Denmark by proxy. Also at his baptism, by the way, Elizabeth was by proxy the godmother. She sent 50 stand-ins for her at the baptism. Well, Anne Denmark was married in Denmark, and she began to make her way back to Scotland to join James I. Well, this was not a matter of carry-on under-the-seat luggage. Her mother hired 500 seamstresses to make her wardrobe. And she commandeered 12 ships to get her from Denmark to Scotland. That's really some wedding. Well, that didn't go well because the weather stopped the ships in Norway. So James was wondering whether this was accidental by the weather or whether it was deliberate because they didn't want to go ahead with the union. So he went to Oslo and eventually went to Copenhagen And then they came back to Scotland. He was gone 6 months before they were together again together for the first time in Scotland. Another thing that would have to happen would be he would need to have an heir. Anne or Anna, the history books say Anne. I've got a facsimile of a letter here. She signed Anna, so I guess she liked to be called Anna. At any rate, Anna, in the first 13 years of marriage, was pregnant 7 times and fought for 3 children. All right, now we have an heir, potential heir. Third thing that would have to happen would be, got to do something about James's mother. Well, obviously, she would be claimant to the throne. Well, Elizabeth took care of that, as you remember from history, and Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed. Another thing that would have to happen before he really lay claim to the throne would be that he'd have to have some help. So there was a lot of political going back and forth in the years before Elizabeth died, probably the 2 years before she died in 1603. Going back and forth between those that wanted the union and those that did not want James to be the king of England. In fact, that correspondence was so secret that they assigned numbers to people who were involved. So you didn't get or somebody didn't get a letter from so-and-so, got a letter from number 29. And you would know who that would be. But that kept the thing rather undercover while they were politically trying to get or keep from having James as the king of England. And then another thing just happens inevitably. People get old. And Elizabeth got old. She was 70 when she finally died. She got old. And if you've seen some of those specials on Queen Elizabeth, you always see her in a very brilliant red wig. That's to cover up her gray hair. And she had bags in her eyes. And she couldn't put away the wrinkles that were there. And her voice was beginning to weaken. And finally, she died. Well, still, she had not said who would succeed her. And this was a big campaign on various people to try to succeed her. In fact, I read that there were something like 14 claimants to the throne, of whom James was just one. Well, as she was expiring, the nobles gathered. The Archbishop of Canterbury visited her. And finally, on the last day, there were just 3 of her lords who were present as she lay dying. And one of them, who was pro-James, said to her, "Who will succeed you?" She didn't respond. And then said to her, "Will James succeed you?" And then the story goes, she made some kind of lifting of her hands to form what they assumed was a crown. So these 3 lords decided that that's the story they would give out. She actually designated James to be her successor. Well, maybe she did, maybe she didn't. But that helped James's campaign, of course. And just a couple of weeks after she died, not only had he been informed, but he was ready to go to London. So he packed up his entourage and they crossed the border at Berwick, and he spent 28 days getting from Edinburgh to a town outside of London. Every day, except when they had to travel, but every stop was filled with horses and riding and hunting and drinking. And of course they would stop at castles, and each owner of the castle would try to outdo the previous one, so that he was having a great time. And finally got to London, and then just before Christmas in 1603, he moved the court to Hampton Court, just outside of London. Part of the reason was that Britain was being plagued by the bubonic plague, pardon the pun. And a lot of people were dying. They say 700 to 800 people a week were dying in England from the plague. So let's get out of London and let's get over to Hampton Court, which he did. He arrived there on December 23rd of 1603, and festivities of Christmas were on. They had a couple of plays, a Shakespeare play. Shakespeare, of course, was alive. A Shakespeare play, and Anna. She was a party girl, we'd say today, and she liked that kind of life, and she liked to star in some of those plays, and she put on one that Christmas at Hampton Court. Well, Christmas passed, and then James turned to a matter that concerned him, and that was religion. Now, James was no religious idiot or ignoramus, not at all. He was well versed. He could translate any chapter in the Bible from Latin to French to English. He also knew some Italian, Greek, Hebrew, and the classics. At 15, he was writing sonnets and poetry. At 8, and having them published. Well, when you're king, that's no problem to get them published. At 18, he published such a book. His major works up to and including 1616, remember this is 1611, but up to 1616 included, a collection of his works included a paraphrase on the Revelation, a meditation on the Lord's Prayer. This is a large volume, not as thick as this, but same size. 53 pages on demonology, 9 pages, the title of which was A Counter Blast Against Tobacco, which has just been introduced to England. And 92 pages, guess where his priorities are, on the divine right of kings versus Parliament. So he came to Hampton Court and the religious discussions with a lot of knowledge about theology, theological subjects, and religion. James was rather open about it. He thought the Anglicans and the Catholics could worship, not necessarily in the same place, but they could worship side by side. Well, Puritans wanted to say. The Anglicans wanted to say. The Catholics wanted to say. The Catholics had to propose what they wanted from France, but this was the group that James put together at Hampton Court. The rundown goes like this. Roman Catholics, 0. Puritans, 4. Anglicans, 18. King and moderator, 1. Well, one counted more than all the rest. The Puritans were getting nowhere, and James was about to forget the whole thing, and the Puritan leader said, I think we need a new translation of the Bible. And the Anglican said, if we had everybody's wish about translations, we'd have a multitude of translations. And the king said, let's have it. Guess who won? Now, one reason the king said it was he did not like the Bible that was circulating at that time in England and in Scotland, and that was the Geneva Bible. And that's the one here that's closed because it's got an original binding on it. And the Geneva Bible was full of notes on the margin. And the Geneva Bible was translated and annotated and published in, guess where? Geneva. And Geneva was a center for Calvinism and Presbyterianism, and that meant divine right of kings was not priority. And their notes were Calvinistic, and the king objected to those notes. One of them in particular, in Exodus 1, where the midwives are said in the note, not in the text, but in the note, are said to have disobeyed lawfully. Now, that wouldn't sit very well with a king that wanted the divine right to rule. So he knew those notes, he didn't like them. So when the new translation was proposed, he said, great, let's have it. Let's get rid of the Geneva popularity with all of those very Calvinistic notes. And that's how the King James Bible was born, almost as an afterthought. But it was produced so accurately, so beautifully, so carefully, many people involved, depending on how you count it, 47, 54 scholars, and they worked diligently for those 7 years from 1604 to 11, and they went over, they were divided into companies, and they went over their translations carefully, and many people had input, and finally the King James was published, but not without some mistakes, some things that had to be corrected, however you want to mention it. I've got to say something about a couple of the translators. One was, according to his colleagues, drunk every night, but sober in the morning so he could work. He was a Hebrew scholar. Well, I think students who take Hebrew think the only way to get through is to get drunk every night. The Hebrew professor here, I apologize publicly. Oh, he is here. He and another translator were Arminians. If you don't understand the word. One of the other translators, whose name was George Abbott, he killed a man while this translation was going on. He was invited to a hunt, and he told the host he was not a good shot, but he had to go anyway, so he went, and he shot an arrow, sharp point, and it hit one of the groundskeepers, who bled to death before they could get him any help. Well, that disqualified him from translating, because the church said, you're a man of blood. But the king pardoned him. Now this man Abbott was not only the only murderer in the group, but he was the only one to crown a king, because the next king, Charles I, was crowned by Abbott, who was then Archbishop of Canterbury. Kind of strange twist to history and fate. Well, there were some of these problems. This King James is open to Luke 23 about the crucifixion. And it says, you remember this, it says in the text, there were two other malefactors crucified with Jesus. The original King James has no punctuation at that point. So it reads, there were two other malefactors, meaning Jesus was also a malefactor. Well, I can't have that. So they corrected it soon by putting commas in. Two other, comma, malefactors, comma, who were crucified with him. There was also, in the original King James, a paragraph symbol, kind of a reverse P, you've seen those. And that doesn't appear after Acts 20. Nobody knows why, except maybe Barker ran out of them. So they just disappear from the text. And Barker had the patent on printing the Bible, and he had to pay £3,500 for it, but he had the exclusive patent. And then there were other problems in the translation, misrepresentations or mistranslations or mistakes or whatever. You heard about the Wicked Bible. You know, if that were in print today, it would sure be a bestseller, wouldn't it? Well, the Bible says. But here's some others. Blessed are the placemakers instead of peacemakers. Know you not that the unrighteous shall inherit the kingdom of God, 1 Corinthians 6, instead of righteous. The text should say, printers have persecuted me without a cause. And one Bible came out, one King James Bible came out, printers have persecuted me without a cause. If you've ever published a book, you can really sympathize with that one. Go and sin on instead of go and sin no more. The fool has said in his heart, there is a God. Let the children first be killed instead of filled. The murderer shall surely be put together instead of to death. And there's a few more, but here's one. I will that women adorn themselves in modern apparel instead of modest apparel. That might